Hello once again. Welcome to Zephyr's BI and Analytics, where we learn by building BI projects. Today on this channel, I'm going to be walking you through how you can create a financial report just like the one I have on my screen right now. This was my report for the Data DNA August 2024 Finance Data Challenge. We're going to be looking at some finance KPIs. We're also going to be writing some DAX expressions. And finally, we're going to be looking at how we can use bookmarks and navigations to optimize our report. This is actually a two-page report, but I have about 4 navigations. First is the overview. Next is the profit breakdown. Next is the expense breakdown. And finally, we have the quarterly income and expense statement. So, what are we waiting for? If it's your first time on this channel, please subscribe, click on the notification button to always stay updated when projects like this are uploaded on the channel. So, attached to the video description is a link to a OneDrive where you'll be able to download the dataset you need to create this report and also the UI images you also need to create this report. Next, let's open up our Power BI and let's begin creating this report. So, once my Power BI desktop is open, I already have a copy of the dataset in my downloads folder. It's an Excel file, so I can quickly come to import data from Excel. I'll navigate to my folder where I have the dataset. I'll select the dataset and simply click on Open. So, when the navigator pane is open, the table we actually need is the revenue expense table. I'll check the revenue expense table. I'll also check the dictionary. We really don't need the dictionary, but in this case, I'm going to check it so you can go through the dictionary, have an idea of what each column in the dataset, what they mean. So I'll check the dictionary and I'll click on Transform Data. Great. So it automatically opens up Power Query, which is the data transformation tool for Power BI. So this is the dictionary table. You get to see the data columns and you get to see the definition of each of the column. You can actually go through that. Then you also get to see some examples of KPI that are here already that have been calculated for you. We have the revenue, we have the cost of goods, gross profit, OPEX, EBIT, interest and tax, net profit and all. So now we're only interested in the revenue expense table. Once we get to the revenue expense table, we actually have 9 columns on this table, 580 rows. The first column is the year, month name, month sequence. These 3 columns, we actually have them on the date already. So we really don't need these 3 columns. So I'll select the year, hold down my control button, select the month name, month sequence. I'll simply right click and say remove columns. Great. Now we're left with just 6 columns. The first column is the date. The second column is the business line. The third column is the amount. The amount in this case is either revenue or expense. Then we have the expense subgroup. We have the revenue/expense group. Then finally, we have revenue or expense. Great. Now, merely looking at the amount column, you will see that we have positive values and negative values. The negative values are actually tied to expense. Now, I don't want to show my expense, the sum of my expense as a negative value. I really would just want to show the values, then probably have a title on top of it that says total expense. I don't want it to show a negative value as the total expense. You can do it whichever way you want, but that's what I actually want in this case. So to do that, I have to create another column, another amount column using this amount, this very column we already have here. So I'll select this column, I'll come to add column. What I want to do now is I want to add column from example, from selection. I'll click from selection. Great. I'll navigate to one of the rows where I have a negative value. I'll double click here and I'll just select 15,000. I'll hit my enter button. Automatically my values are uploaded. Column from example, it definitely looks at the column you selected, the examples of the values you selected. Now, because I supplied a value outside the negative sign. I didn't include the negative sign, automatically just imputed all the values I have without both the ones with negative sign and the one without negative sign. They are all now similar, same, without the sign. That's exactly what I want. So the next thing I'm going to do is click on OK. Once this is done, I will just rename this column from absolute value to amount. And finally, I'm going to change the data type to whole number. So basically, this is all the transformation we actually need to do on this data. There's no other transformation we actually need to do. If there's any other one, we can always come back and make that transformation. I'm now going to click on File, Close and Apply so we can load this data to Power BI where we can begin our analysis. So for the data dictionary, I'll just leave it here for now, just in case I want to make reference to it. But eventually, at the end of everything, I have to delete the data dictionary table. I really don't need it. So next, I'm going to come to File. I'm going to click on Close and Apply. Great. Now we have our data in Power BI Desktop. Quickly, I'm just going to come to Format Your Report page. I'm going to navigate to Canvas Settings. I'm going to change the setting type from 16:9 to Custom, and the height is going to be 1080. The width is going to be 1920. This is just to give me an extra space in my Canva. Great. I'll navigate to Table View and I'll select the Revenue Expense table. So we have our table right here in Power BI. Quickly, I'll select the date column. I'll change the format, and most times I like the DD, MM, and YY. I'll select that. Now we have two amount column in our data. We can actually remove this one. We don't need it unless you want to use this. But we're going to be working with the new amount column we created. That's the one without the dollar sign. So quickly, one thing we're going to do, because we're going to be doing some calculations using the date column, we simply then need a calendar table. But if you observe in our data, we actually have the data for just a year, from January 2023 to December 2023. So we're going to create a quick calendar table that would definitely just start from January 2023 and ends in December 2023. We then connect the calendar table to our date column in this data set. So to do that, while we're here, I'm simply going to come to Table Tools and I'll click on New Table. So there are a lot of ways to create a calendar table in Power BI. You can use the calendar auto function, you can use the calendar function, but for this table, we only need the month column, which is probably the month number and the month name column. Those are the two columns we need in the table. So we're simply going to create a date table or a calendar table, whichever one you prefer. The naming convention is strictly up to you. For me, I'll just say dates table. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to hold down my shift key and hit the enter button. I'm going to create a variable and I'm going to say variable. I want to call this variable, let's just say base calendar. And now I want this variable to be my calendar table. So I'll set the date range for my calendar table from the start date to the end date. So I'll use the calendar function in this case. I'll just say calendar. I'll say calendar. Now it's asking for my start date. The start date, I'll call on the date function. The start date in this case, I want it to be 2023, 1st January, 1st. I'll close this, put a comma. My end date, I'll also call on the date function. I want the year also to be 2023. The month now should be 12 and the day should be 31st. So with this, I have a calendar table starting from January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023. Great. So what I want to do now is simply return. I want to return. But before I return, I also want to add columns. I want to add 2 columns to the date table. I want to add 2 columns. Those 2 columns are actually month number and month. So I'll just call on the add columns. Now it's asking for the table. Which table do I want to add this column to? I actually want to add it to my base calendar. So this is my base calendar. I'll put a comma. Now the first column I said is going to be month number. This month number is definitely we're going to use the month function. So I'm going to say month. I'm going to say month. I'll call on the month function, then simply supply my date. So what I'm simply saying is, I want you to go to my date column in my table, extract the month number. So we're going to get the month number with this. The next thing we need to get is actually the month itself. So I can actually say, okay, so I'll do 2 things. I'll just say short month. Short month. Short month simply means that's the name of the column. I actually just want to extract. If it's January, I just want JAN. If it's February, I just want FEB. Just like that. That's short month. That's the name of the column. So for short month, we're going to be using the format function. I need to put a comma here. So we're going to call on the format function. So what do we want to format? We also want to format the date. Now we want to format the date. Then we're just going to say format it MMM. That's for the short month. I'll close this bracket. And finally, we can say month. We can call on our last column. Our last column should just be month. That's the month name, January, February, March, and all. So we're also going to call on the month function in this case. Or not the month function now. We're going to be using the format function. Format. What do we want to format? The date also. I'll just put a comma now. This time around, instead of having 3M, we're going to have 4. So month, MMM, M. Then I'll close the bracket. I'll simply come down here and close the bracket. So with this simple code, we've created a calendar table that would have 3 columns. One is going to be the month number, the short month, and the month. So once we're done, I'm simply going to commit this. Great. So underneath here, you can see we have our table here. I'm just simply going to format this to just date. And I'm also going to change the format to the one we used earlier, DDMMYY. So we have our date table created already. So one thing we need to do, because we need to visualize most of our KPIs from January to December or December to January, whichever we want to do that. If we decide to use the month the short month or the month, we're going to be having it not sorted in the proper order. That's why we created the month number. So first thing we need to do here is select the short month column, come to sort column by, and sort it by the month number. Also select the month, come to sort column by, and sort it by the month number. So we've taken care of the sort issue we're going to have much more later. So we can now sort our data using the short month or the month in ascending or descending order, starting from January to December or December to January. So the next thing we simply need to do is come to model view. We now need to create a connection between our revenue expense and our date table. So we select the date on the date table, whichever one, and drop it on the revenue and expense date. So we have a one-to-many connection. I'll simply just save this. Great. So we have our connection. Our date table now is connected to our revenue expense table. I'll navigate back to report view. So with this, we can begin creating our report. So to do that, I also want to make sure that our DAX measures are created and are stored in a separate table. So I'll just create a simple table that will hold all our DAX measure. So to do that, I'll just come to enter data up here. I'll just say enter data. I'll just give this table a name. I would simply just say DAX and I'll load. So now we have 4 tables, including our dictionary table. We have 4 tables. We have the date table, the DAX table, revenue expense. For this date table, I'm simply going to adjust the naming convention to be date table. Wait. So for every measure we're going to be creating for this report, we're going to store that measure on the DAX table. So let's quickly look at our table view once more. Let's navigate to our revenue expense. Wait. One of the first KPI we looked at is the revenue. So for the revenue, we have a revenue or expense column and we have the amount tied to it, which means we simply need to calculate the amount, then filter that amount to where the revenue or expense column is revenue. Then for us to calculate the expense, we need to calculate the amount and filter to when the revenue or expense column is expense. That's how we're going to get our total revenue and our total expense. So let's go to the report view. Like I said, for every measure we need to create, we're going to stay on the DAX table. So the next thing we'll quickly do is bring in the UI image for this report. Like I said, you should have downloaded that by now because there's a link to the video. There's a link attached to the video where you'll be able to download the dataset and the UI image you need to create this report. So let's begin. Next, we need to bring in the UI image so we can begin creating our reports. So for the background image, I'm simply going to come to format your page report. I'm going to navigate to Canva background and I'm going to click on add file. That's I want to browse for more image. I'll navigate to my pictures where I have the image. I saved it as capture. I'll simply just select the image. I'll click on open. Then I need to adjust the transparency. I'll bring it down to 0. Then the image fit is going to be from normal to fit. Great. So we have our background where we want to create our entire report. So before we begin, let's quickly navigate back to the report we want to create. Also, before we do that, I've also attached part of the things you're going to be downloading is this document, PDF document I attached to the files. Is just a simple PDF document explaining the key KPIs we're going to be calculating for this report and how we actually going to be calculating them. So total revenue, we have the sum of all revenue down to the profitability KPIs, from our gross profit to gross profit margin, EBIT, net profit and all. This document is also attached to the link. You can easily just download this document and go through it. So you have a guide on the KPIs we have and how we're basically calculating the KPIs. So let's navigate back to the report we are trying to actually create. Let's just have a quick look at the report. So the 4 KPIs we need for the first page are actually the revenue, expense, gross profit, and net profit. So this is actually the value, revenue. We have a particular month selected in this case, that's February. Then we have the change. This change is actually tied to the background also. So you have the value changing, then you also have the background color also changing. So in case so we have a constant decrease in revenue from March to April and May also. The revenue also decreased across revenue expense. Okay, so there's actually an increase when it got to, was it May also? Yes. Okay, yeah. So in May we had an increase when it got to May. So you can actually see the different change. I think there was an increase across board from revenue, expense, gross profit, net profit, and all. So we are going to start with the card visuals. We're going to start with the card visuals. So we're simply going to start with revenue, then to expense, gross profits, and gross profit margin. Like I said, there's a document attached that will guide you on how we actually got this entire KPIs we're going to be using for this report. So let's navigate back to our report. So the first measure we're going to be creating is actually the total revenue measure. Total revenue measure. That's the first measure we're going to be creating. So to do that, I'm just going to stay on the DAX table. I'll right click and say new measure. Now I'm going to give this measure total revenue. Total revenue. I'll just call this total revenue. Now for the total revenue, remember, we have a revenue or expense column, which means we need to calculate our amount, then filter to when the revenue or expense column is revenue. So this time around, we're going to be using the calculate function. So I'll simply say calculate. What do I want to calculate? So I want to calculate and I want to sum the amount. So sum the revenue or expense. Like I said, we have two amounts. So remember the amount we're using, the one without the dollar sign. Sum the amount column. And now filter to when the revenue or expense column is equal to revenue, where the revenue or expense column. Now the spelling must be exact spelling we have in that column. So this automatically gives us the revenue. We're calculating the amount, then we're filtering the revenue or expense column should filter it to when it's just revenue. So this gives us our total revenue. So that's for revenue. Once I've done that, you can actually expand this table, this DAX table. You see that we have our total revenue measure, but we have a column here, column 1. So I'm going to click on the 3 dots we have here, and I'm going to come down here and say delete from model. I'm deleting the column 1 from the model. Great, so I have my DAX table up here. The next measure we need to create also is, let's say, total expense. So I'll right click and say new measure. And I want to say total expense. This would be expense. For the expense, is the same principle. We're going to say calculate also. Now we want to calculate. What do we want to calculate? We want to sum. We want to sum what now? The amount also. That's the amount. Remember, the amount without the dollar sign. I'll close this bracket. Then we also want to filter it to when the revenue or expense group is now equal to expense. Remember, the spelling must be exact. I'll close the bracket. The enter button. So now I can simply just bring a card visual here. I can bring a card visual and say this should be my revenue. This should be my revenue. So total revenue. I'll also bring another card visual and I'll simply say this should be my expense. Great. So we have the revenue at 18 million, then we have the expense at 13 million. Great. So if we navigate back to the report we have here, you can actually see we have the revenue, then we have from. What from is simply saying when you have a particular month selected, what was the revenue for the previous month? So let's say we have February selected. Is simply asking from is simply displaying what was the revenue for January. So this is actually displaying the revenue for the current month that is being selected. While from is displaying the revenue from the previous month. While the change is actually the percent change. Is there an increase or a decrease from compared to the previous month? This is actually the sum of the revenue across the different what is it called now? We have the different business line. Yeah, business line. So the revenue across the different business line. So that's a stacked column creating that. So the next thing we need to do is we have our total expense already. So one thing we can do is come here and simply select a slicer, right? Bring in a slicer. Go to our date table and bring in our month into the slicer. So we have January to December. I'll simply just keep this here. Now, when you select February, you get to see the revenue for February, the expense for February. So one thing I'll do, I'll just select this card visual quickly and come to format, call out value. I'll change the decimal places. I want it to be, let's say, 2 decimal places. I'll also make these 2 decimal places. Wait. Now, when you compare the value we currently have here, 1.57, 1.09 for February, to the report we have here, 1.57, 1.09 for the month of February. So we'll focus more on the revenue now. Let's create everything about the revenue, then we'll proceed to the expense. I'll navigate back to the report. Now we have the total revenue here. This is the total revenue. I'll just come to format, general, effects. I'll turn off the background. I'll go to the visual. I'll turn off the category label. Much more later, we'll talk about the formatting, but for now, I'll just make the font size 30. I'll reduce the size. I'll just leave it here for now. So we have the measure for revenue. When you select a particular month, it filtered to that particular month. But remember, we want another card here to display the previous month, which means we need another measure to show us the revenue for January. So to do that, I'll simply just stay on the DAX table once more, right click and say new measure. So for this measure, I'm going to call it previous month revenue. I'll just say previous month revenue. That's what I'm going to call this measure. So I'm going to stay and I'll simply say previous month revenue. So the revenue previous month, we are going to be using the date add function. So I'm simply going to say calculate, right? What do we want to calculate? We want to calculate our revenue, but we already have a revenue, total revenue measure. So I'm just going to call on that measure. Calculate our total revenue, right? I'll put a comma now. But this time around, we want to call on the date add function and say, for the date add function, I want you to calculate our total revenue, but I want you to go back the previous month. So when you call on the date add function, it's asking for the date. So we have a date table there. So I'll say date table, our date in our date table. I'll put a comma. Now interval, we want to go back -1. Interval, we want to go back interval of what? Interval of 1 month. So interval of 1 month and close this. I'll finally close the bracket. So we're going back, calculating our revenue, but it's for the previous month. So once this is done, I'll just commit this. Now I can bring a card visual. I'll just bring a card visual here. This is another card visual. I'll just say previous month revenue. I'll select this. I'll say format painter. And yeah, great. So now, if I select this value, that's this card, and come to format, call out value, I'll just reduce this value to say 18. So this is 18. I'll bring it here. So now, if we go to January, I want you to watch this card visual. This is the previous month. Now, if we're in January, we actually don't have a previous month, which is December 2022. So when I select January, this will automatically appear as blank because we don't have a previous month. So one thing we can do to optimize this, instead of having blank, we can just select the previous month measure and say +0. So instead of showing us blank, when we don't have any value, we just have 0 displayed there. So now when you come to February, you get to see the revenue for February. This is revenue for February, then from the previous month revenue as 1.9 million. So that settles that. So the next thing we also need to do is to calculate the percent change. But before we proceed, I'll simply just come to File. I'll go to Save As. I'll browse this device. I simply want to save this in my downloads. I'll just save this and say finance report. Finance report. I'll save this. Wait, so one thing is we have the current month revenue, we have the previous month revenue. We also want to know the percent change. Was there an increase in revenue or a decrease in revenue when you compare these 2 months together? So, which means we need another measure to say, which is revenue month on month. So, we can stay on our DAX measure once more. I'll select the table and I'll come to new measure. I'll just say month on month revenue. So this will simply be the total revenue, right? We have the total revenue now minus the previous month revenue. So this will give us the revenue change in value. So when I bring a card visual here and I select the month on month revenue now, this is the month on month revenue. So you're seeing a negative sign, minus 381K, which means there was a decrease in revenue from January to February. So in January, we actually had 1.9 million. In February, we have 1.57 million. So the difference between January sales, January revenue and February revenue is minus 381,000. So so this is the value. So one thing is we have the value, but it's actually not the value we want to show. Rather, we want to show the percent increase or decrease. The percent increase or decrease. That's what we're interested in showing. So we have the card showing the current month revenue, the previous month revenue. Now we have the month on month change, but we want this month on month change to be a percentage value. So to do that, I'll remove this. We can simply just create another measure now and say this measure should be month on month revenue percent. So to do that, I'll just say month on month revenue percent. So this will simply be a division. So we're going to call on the divide function. I'll simply say divide now. Divide. Now what do we want to divide? We already have the month on month revenue. So we just say month on month revenue, divide our month on month revenue, right? By our previous month revenue. So that will give us the percent increase or decrease. Settled. So once this is done, I'll just commit this. So we've calculated the percent change in revenue, either increase or decrease. So when I bring a card visual next, I bring a card visual now and I put the month on month revenue percent, you're not going to get the revenue percent increase. Now we're having negative 0.21, which means we need to format this month on month revenue percent. We'll select the measure and simply come to change the format from general to percentage. So there was a decrease, 19.56% decrease in revenue. So I'll just come to format visual, I'll call out value. I'll reduce this to, let's say, 18 or 12. 12 is definitely too small. Make it 16. Then I'll come to the category label and turn it off. So this is actually the month-on-month revenue percent change, which was what we have attached to the card visual we had here. So I'll come to general effects, I'll turn off the background image. So exactly what we had in the report, like this. So if I come to March, you get to see the revenue for March, the previous month revenue, which is 1.57, then the revenue change is still a decrease, minus 6.22% decrease. But when you get to April, it's still a decrease, 11%. I think by May we had an increase. So by May we had an increase from 1.16 M in revenue to 1.7. That was a 46.92% increase in revenue. Great. So we have this. We have the three components we need for the card. So the next thing we're quickly going to do is to visualize our revenue by the different revenue subgroup. We're going to be using a stacked bar chart or a 100% stacked bar chart. So I'm just going to select, let's say 100% stacked bar chart. I'm going to bring that here, expand. I'm now going to select the total revenue measure. I will expand my table, revenue and expense table. I'll take the revenue slash expense subgroup. I'll bring that and drop it on the legend here. Now I have this stacked chart created for me. We're quickly now going to format this, and to do that, I'll come to format visual. On general, I'll turn off the title. I'll expand the effects and put off the background. Next, I'm going to go to visual. For the y-axis, I'm going to turn off the values. I'm also going to turn off the title. We don't need that. For the x-axis, I'm going to turn off the values also. I'm also going to turn off the title. And for the legend, I'm going to turn off the title. Then I'll expand the legend position. I want to change that to be bottom left. Great. Great. So I'm just simply going to come and make a little adjustment here. I'm going to bring this down a bit and take this card visual we have here. I'm going to take it up. It should be somewhere here. Then we can have our chart here. So we now have the revenue broken down into the different revenue subgroup. So one thing about, we're only seeing this in a stacked bar chart, but we're not seeing the values, which means we then need to bring in a matrix table, and we're going to visualize the revenue and the different subgroup using a matrix table. So I'm just going to select a matrix table. I'll bring that here. I'm going to select the revenue slash expense group. Immediately I add in my total revenue measure. I'm only going to see for the revenue subgroup. So once we do this, the next thing we simply need to do is just a quick format on this table. And to do that, I'll simply navigate to format visual. For the layout, I'm going to change it from default to none. So we have none. The next thing, I'll expand the grid. I'll expand the borders. I'll scroll down. I'll change the border color to white. I'll scroll up. The next thing we need to do, come to the column headers. I'm going to change the text color to white. Wait. Finally, I'll put off the column subtotals. I'll put off the row subtotal also. So this is what we're going to be having here. I'll just click on the three more options here. Sort by. I want to sort by total revenue. I'll bring this and keep it here. Great. So with this, we are almost done with our first KPI card. That's the total revenue KPI card. Just make some adjustments here to make sure it fits in. Great, so this is the revenue KPI card. We just need to add one little change here. So I'm going to select the table. I'm going to come to format. Then where I have values, I'm going to change the background to that's let's say white, 10% darker. I'll scroll down again, change the alternate background to white, 10% darker also. So I have these values column highlighted. So this is exactly a replica of what we have on the other report. So I'll select the matrix table. I'll come to format, general once more, effects. I'll put off the background also. So let's just make adjustments here. What we need to do is just make some little adjustments here. Make some little adjustments. I'll bring this down here to create space. So for the charts, I'm just going to expand a bit. Okay. I'll bring this down a bit also. Great. So for our values, our total revenue value, I'm just going to increase the font size a bit. Okay, it's actually 30. Let's try 35 and see how it looks. Okay, great. So we're good with 35. Now for the from, that's the previous month revenue. Let's see if we can increase this a bit to 20. Then for the percent change, I think we're actually fine with what we have here. Great. So one thing we can also do is select the chart. Then we can apply the different to the bars. We can apply the different colors. So one thing I did was for each of the subgroup, the color should follow a particular format. So let's quickly navigate back to the report we have here. I'm just going to select the chart. I'll go to bars, scroll down. Now for consulting and professional services, I'll expand and just click more colors. I'll go to the next one, other income. I'll expand, click more colors. And finally, I'll go to, okay, so let me pick them one after the other. For consulting and other services, I'll just more colors. I'll copy the color code, navigate back to the report we're creating right now. This is consulting. I'll just paste the color code here. So the color code is C0BFF8. So I have that color code there. I'll navigate back just to grab the color code to make sure we're using the same colors. More color. I'll just copy the color code once more. This is for what? Other income. This is for other income. Other income. More colors. I'll paste this here. And finally, what's the third one? Sales. So for sales, I'll just more options, copy the color code once more, and navigate back to the reports. I'll change this, apply to sales, more options, and paste the color code. Great. So we are almost having a feel of exactly what we have in the report we're trying to create. So there's one more little change we also need to do. If you navigate back to the report we have here, you can actually see that we have a little background here that changes along with the values also. So for that, we're going to be creating two different measures actually. Two different measures. So first, I'm going to just simply bring this down here. So I'll select this and I'll come to format. You can actually go to general. I didn't think about this before now, effects. And let's say we put on the background. Now we can do conditional formatting for the background. So what we need to do is quickly write a measure, stay on our measure table here, and we're going to say new measure. So the first measure we're going to be writing is going to be the revenue value color. There's a reason we're saying the value color, because the value color is going to be different from the background color. So this is going to be using an if function. So we can simply just say if, because we want the color to be green when there's an increase in revenue and red when there's a decrease in revenue. How do we now achieve that? I'm just simply going to say if our month-on-month revenue, if it's greater than 0, then we want green. Else it should be red. So with this, we have the color code for the value. This color is going to be tied to the value. But for the background itself, it's going to be a different color, because it's going to be a lighter color of red and a lighter color of green. So for that, we need to write another measure. This same measure, but we're going to be using a light color code and a light green color code and a light red color code. So I'm simply going to grab those codes from the old reports. So I'll just expand and look for the color code. I'll look for the color code. Okay, I'm sure I didn't name this measure as well. Okay, so this is the color code I'll be using. So I'll simply just copy this code. I'll copy this code. I'll navigate back to our report now. And finally, I'll say I want to create a new measure once more. And new measure. I'll paste the measure I copied. So if you look, this measure is actually revenue background color. So this should be revenue background color. So we're using the same principle. Now, instead of this measure we have here, it's going to be month-on-month revenue. So if month-on-month revenue is greater than 1, we have this color code. Greater than 1 or greater than 0, it's fine. You can use any. Then we have this color code, else we have this color code. So now, to this our what is it called now? Our change month-on-month revenue KPI, this card here, this card visual we have here, this month-on-month card visual, that's the month-on-month percent card visual. For this, we're not going to apply the color format. So first, I'm going to come to format, right? For the colored value, I'm now going to say conditional formatting. Now, this should be based on field value. The field value should now be revenue value color. This is the value color. So I'll select the value color and click OK. So this color will only apply to the value. So the value is either going to be green or red, depends if there's an increase in revenue. So if I go back to April, the value should be red, that's negative 11%. If I come to May, it should be green. So we don't only want to apply the color format to the value, we also want to apply it to the background. So I'm going to navigate to General, Effects. We have the background color as white. So I'm going to click on the conditional formatting. Also, we want this to be based on feed value. Now, this feed value is now going to be the revenue background color. So I'll select this and I'll click on OK. So we have the background color attached to it already. So now you can actually see that we have the background color to be light green and the value green. If I select April, you can see the background color changes to red. So one thing we can do is simply reduce the size. Color value, this is 16. Let's make it 14 or 12. So 14 or 12 is fine. Just reduce the size a bit and bring this and drop it right here. Great. So you can actually see now, if I come to May, you see the value changes alongside with the color. If I come to June, the value changes alongside with the color. July, August, then okay, February. So with this, we are actually done with the total revenue KPI card. So we only need to add few things. First thing we need to do is get our text box, and we can simply say total revenue, or we just say revenue. I'll highlight this, I'll change it to DIN, which is the format we're currently using. Increase the font size to say 18. Okay, let's make it 20. It should be revenue. One thing I'll do is come to general, that effects, I'll just put off the background. So this is revenue. Now we also need to add a little title to this, and we can come to format general, just put on the title and say the title should be from, and that would do. So with this, we are actually just saying I'll just make some adjustments here. I'll take this up a bit. Great. So this is a simple arrangement. With one KPI card, we're able to see the total revenue, right? We're able to see the change from previous months. We're able to see the value. We're able to see the breakdown across the different revenue group, that's the subgroup also, all in one KPI card. So if I go to match, you get to see the change, if there's an increase in revenue or a decrease in revenue. So with this, we're actually done with the revenue KPI card. Next, we proceed to doing the same thing for the expense. We're going to do the same thing for the expense, create exactly what we have for the revenue now, but now it's going to be for the expense. So let's begin. We already have our measure for total expense. I'm going to select the revenue card, click on the format pane tab, and just select total expense. So I have this consistency with my KPIs. So now we have our total revenue for this particular month. That's our total expense for this particular month of March when we filter. Next, we need to calculate the previous month expense. Previous month expense. Just like we did for previous month revenue, we're going to stay on the DAX once more and say new measure. This measure will then be previous month. This should be previous month EXP. So what we want to do is simply calculate now. What do we want to calculate? We already have our total expense. So we say total expense measure. But now we want to use the date add to say, now call on our date table, our date table date. We want you to go back an interval of 1 month. So this will calculate the previous month expense. I'll simply hit the enter button. So now we have the previous month expense. So what do we need to do? We also need to calculate the current month minus the previous month expense to get the change. Was there an increase in expense or a decrease in expense? So I'm going to stay on the measure once more and just say new measure. This is now going to be month on month EXP, month on month expense, month on month expense, which is simply going to be total expense minus previous month expense. So this will give us the month on month expense. Now, we actually don't want to see the month-on-month expense value. Rather, we want to see the percent change. Was there an increase in expense or a decrease in expense? So to do that now, we're going to stay on the DAX measure once more and click on new measure. I can actually write all these using one measure, but I'm breaking this down so you can actually get a hands-on of how we got the values we're getting. So this is now going to be month-on-month expense percent, which is simply divide. What do we want to divide now? You can actually guess. We want to divide our month-on-month expense by previous month expense. And with that, we already have the percent change, if it's an increase in expense or a decrease in expense for the month. So with this, we already have the components we need to create our expense KPI card. So the next thing we need to do now is I'll simply select this card visual we have here. I'll just say Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll bring this here. Now I'm going to uncheck the previous month revenue and replace it with previous month expense. So this is previous month expense. So quickly, I'm also going to come here, select this, make a copy, Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll bring this down here. And I'm going to uncheck the month-on-month revenue percent, and I'm going to replace it with month-on-month expense percent. Now I'm going to select the month-on-month expense percent, and I'm going to come to format and change this to percentage. Now you can see we have the color format applied to the expense, but that is wrong. We need to go back and create the expense value color and the expense background color. We can't use that of revenue because there are situations where there might be an increase in revenue for a particular month and a decrease in expense. But we're only having that now because we're simply just copying the card visual we have already. So the next thing we need to quickly do is select our DAX measure and say we want to create a new measure now. This is going to be expense value color. So the expense value color. So for the expense value color, remember we're just using an if function to say if, you can guess now, the month-on-month expense is greater than 0, it should simply be green. Should it be green? If the expense is going up, it should be red actually. What do you think? I don't know, but okay, I think it should be red because we want expense to always go down. So it should be red. Then if it's coming down, it should be green. Else it should be green. So we have the expense value color. So now that we have our expense value, it's actually a drop, 7% drop. With our current formatting color we have now, color format, we should this value should actually be green. So I'll select the expense card, just come to format, color value. I would click on the conditional formatting once more, and I'll change this from revenue value color to expense value color, and I'll click on OK. So with this, you can see now that the expense value is now green based on the conditional formatting we've given. So one thing we can do is just go to our revenue background color and copy this. I'll just copy this revenue background color. I'll stay on my measure once more and I'll say new measure. Now we want to create our expense background color. I'll paste the measure we copied. So this should no longer be revenue background color, rather it should be expense background color. But now if our month-on-month expense, not revenue, month-on-month expense, if is greater than 0. We actually want it to be the lighter color. So I would take this, I'll just copy this or cut this and bring it backward. So it's just me swapping the colors because we're using a different principle when it comes to expense. When our expense is actually going down, we want it to be green, but if it's going up, we want it to be red. That's the principle we're applying in this case. So if our month expense is greater than 0, it should be red, else it should be green. So once we've done this, I can now go ahead and select this card visual now. I'll select this card visual. And navigate to format, general, effects, the background color conditional formatting now, and change this from revenue background color to expense background color and click on OK. So the format should apply. So when our expense is coming down, it should be green. If it's going up, it should be red. So we already have that. So next, let's quickly create our bar chart to show our expense by the expense subgroup. So I'll select the stacked bar chart once more. One thing we can simply do is just remove this, select this stacked bar chart, make a copy of it. I'll make a copy of this stacked bar chart. I'll just bring it here. So the next thing I'm simply going to do is uncheck total revenue and replace it with total expense. So this automatically changes to the revenue and the expense subgroup. You can now see it by the expense subgroup. The next thing I'm also going to do is make a copy of this matrix table. I'll just say Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll just bring that here. And I'm simply going to uncheck total revenue from the values. I'll uncheck total revenue and just replace it with total expense. Great, so I retain the format and every other thing. So the only thing we need to do now is simply just come change these colors we have here. I don't know, I think I actually like the colors we have here already. I don't think I really want to change them. I like this color. Power BI automatically assigned to us. I think it's cool. So for you to see the color code, I'll just select this. I'll navigate to format. Now bars. Now for the cost of goods, this is actually the color code. This is the color code for the cost of goods. You can see the color code for the cost of goods. Now for the interest and tax, I'll just expand. This is the color code for the interest and tax. This is the color code. And finally for the OPEX, this is the color code for the OPEX. So you can apply these to your own visual. So next is just to give this a title and call it expense. So I'll just make a copy of this card visual and bring it up here. And we name this to be expense. Wait, so we have the first two cards, the revenue and the expense. So next we are going to be looking at the gross profit. We are going to look at how we can calculate the gross profit, the month-on-month change for the gross profit, then also the gross profit margin. So to do that, let's quickly review the document we have. I'll come to the document. Remember, I've attached a link for you to download this document. So for the gross profit, the formula is simply the total revenue minus the total cost of goods. That will give us the gross profit. Then for the gross profit margin, that's the gross profit divided by the total revenue times 100 or so. So we'll start by calculating the cost of goods, then we get the gross profit, then we'll go ahead and calculate for the gross profit margin. So I'll navigate back to our report. So the first thing we need to do, let's quickly come to our table here. if you navigate to the revenue and expense table, on the revenue/expense group, you will actually see that we have cost of goods here. So which means we can simply calculate our total amount and filter it to where we have the revenue or expense group is equal to cost of goods. So that will give us the total amount for cost of goods. We can then go ahead and subtract it from our total revenue to give us our gross profit. So quickly, I'll come back to report view. I'll stay on my DAX measure once more. I'll say new measure. New measure. So this measure is going to be simply cost of goods. So this is going to be cost of goods, and it simply calculates. We want to calculate now. We'll calculate. What are we calculating? The sum of our amount, sum. We're going to go to our revenue amount. Now we want to filter it to when the revenue or revenue/expense group is equal to COGS. Remember, the spelling must be exact. So once we've done this, I'll simply just commit this. By doing so, we now have the cost of goods value, which means we can then go ahead to calculate the gross profit. To calculate the gross profit now, I'll simply just stay on the DAX table and say new measure. So this will be gross profits, which is simple. We'll say the total revenue now. We're going to subtract the cost of goods from the total revenue. So this will give us our gross profit. So now we have the gross profit. Next, we also need the gross profit margin. We need the gross profit margin. So what I'm going to do next is simply come to the DAX measure once more, say new measure. So this will be gross profit margin. So for the gross profit margin, for the gross profit margin, we simply said is going to be, let's confirm that, is going to be the gross profit divided by the total revenue times 100. So we can now call on our divide function here, simply say divide gross profit by total revenue. So this will automatically give us our gross profit margin. So now we have the gross profit margin, and also what do we need to do next? We also want to see the month-on-month change for the gross profit itself. Is the gross profit increasing? Is it decreasing? Just like we have for the revenue and expense. So let's quickly navigate back to our report now. In our report, so what I did here was, this is the gross profit margin. Then I have the month-on-month change gross profit right here. So what we need to do next is simple. We'll calculate the month-on-month change for the gross profit. So like we've done before, now that we have, if I bring a card visual here and I simply put gross profit, this is the gross profit for the month of March, because we actually have the month of March selected. We can compare that to what we have here. So let me select the month of March. So you can actually see that the month of March, the gross profit is 800K. So the gross profit margin, I'll simply go back now. I'll bring a card again, just let's confirm, just to be sure. So for the gross profit margin, this is the gross profit margin. So we actually have 0.6. So I'm going to convert this to percent. Let's be sure. So we're having 60.90, but that's not what I have here. Let me quickly confirm. So what I have here is quite different from what we have there. Okay, the cost of goods divided by the total revenue. Oh, it's actually the cost of goods. Let's confirm that. For the gross profit margin is actually gross profit by total revenue. Okay, yes, gross profit by total revenue. So what we need to do, I need to fix this. So while we're here, I'll simply just fix this. This is actually gross profit, not cost of goods. Okay, so we are fine now. So the gross profit margin is actually 60.90. I'll navigate back to our report. So we're in order. So the next thing we need to do, like we've done before, I can actually write these whole DAX in just using one DAX to cover everything. But now I also want to break it down for you to get a clear understanding of what we're doing. Now we have the month of March selected. So this is the gross profit for the month of March. Next, we need to calculate the previous month gross profit. And to do that is simple. We simply just stay on our DAX measure and say new measure. For this, we can then say previous month. Let's just say GP as gross profit is equal to, now we'll calculate, we'll use the calculate again. What do we want to calculate? We want to calculate our gross profit. We already have a measure for that. But we want to go back using our date add, our date table, dates. The interval we want to go back is 1 month. So I'll close this. So now we have our previous month gross profit. What's the next thing we need to do is calculate our month on month gross profit, not the percent now, just the month on month gross profit. So to do that also, I'll just say new measure now. So this will be month on month GP, which is simple. We just say our month on month GP now is going to simply be our gross profits, right? Gross profit minus our previous month gross profit, previous month GP. So our current gross profit, subtract that from our previous month gross profit, will give us our month on month GP. So next, we can then go ahead to calculate our month on month GP percent. So one more DAX measure. So this will be our month on month GP percent. That's our month on month gross profit percent. So this will simply be divide now. We're going to divide. What are we dividing? We're dividing our month on month GP by our previous month GP. So with this, we now have our month on month GP percent, which is our month on month gross profit percent. So once we're done with that, we can go ahead and create this. We can go ahead and create our gross profit KPI card. So I'll just remove these because what I want to do is just make a copy of this to retain the formatting. I'll stay on this card visual. Just hit my Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll have this here. Okay, so I will uncheck the total expense and replace it with gross profit. Also, I'll just go to format, call add value. I want to remove the decimal places to be none. So we have the gross profit. Next, we need the gross profit margin. For the gross profit margin, I'll just pick a card visual once more. And I'll put the gross profit margin. This is the gross profit margin. One thing we can do is simply come to format, call add value, reduce the size, let's say 14. Okay, we can make this, let's say 16. Okay, so this will be the gross profit margin. You can just keep this here. Then finally, we need the month on month change. So I'll make a copy of this and bring it here. So I'll uncheck the month on month expense percent and replace it with the month on month GP percent. So we're actually having negative 0.25. So I'll select this and come to format, change the format to percent. But now, remember, the color change is tied to the expense behavior. So we need to create our gross profit color change. We need to create our gross profit color change, starting with the background color and the value itself. So we can simply just come now to our DAX measure and say new measure. New measure. So this is going to be, let's say, this is going to be GP value color, GP value color, and we're simply going to say if what now, our month on month GP is greater than 0. I remember I said if it's greater than 1 before now. No, if it's actually greater than 0, not greater than 1. If it's greater than 0, then this should be green. Just say green. Else it should be red. Just say red. And close the bracket. So this is the value color. This is the value color. This is the value color. Now we also need to get the background color because we want the background color to also change just like we've done before. So I'll just go to one of them that we'll have before. This is revenue background color. Okay, so I'll copy this. I'll just make a copy of this. Ctrl C. Now we need to create a new one. New measure. I'll paste what I copied. But then I'm going to change this from revenue BG color to be GP background color. Then this is no longer month on month revenue, it's rather month on month GP. So with this we are done. We now have the background color and the value color. So quickly let's go make our formatting. So I'll select the card visual now. I'll select the card visual, right? I'll come to format, call out value. For the value, let's start with the value. I'll click on the conditional formatting. Now this should not be based on this, rather it should be based on GP value color. GP value color, because we're talking about the value here. I'll click on OK. Watch the color now changes to red. Okay, so I'll quickly check that. That's GP value color, feed value, GP value color. So what did we say was the condition for the GP value color again? If the month on month GP is greater than 0, or it should be, if it's greater than 0, it should be green, else it should be red. So there's a mistake here. I didn't put a comma, so I need to put a comma. I didn't put a comma there. So watch, it's going to change to red now. The value is going to change to red. Great, so we have the value red. So next we need to go to the background. So let's come to the general here, effects, conditional formatting for the background, changes, and say it should now be based on GP background color. And we'll click on OK. So the color should be red. So we're done with our month on month gross profit. Next, we need to then create our chart. So I'll just make a copy of this chart we have already. Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll bring that here. I'll just bring that here. Okay. So once I have this here, the next thing I need to do is uncheck total expense, right? I will uncheck total expense and replace that with gross profit. But now we are not looking at the gross profit from revenue or expense group. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So come to table view. We'll come to table view and look at our table. This is our table. So we are not looking at it at this angle, at this revenue or expense group. We're breaking down the gross profit. No. If you come to what I have here, you can see that we are breaking the gross profit down by the different business line, not the revenue, source of revenue is by the different business line, not either. So for expense, we broke it down by the expense subgroup. For revenue, we broke it down by the revenue subgroup, right? Now for gross profit, we are breaking it down by the business line, the different business line we have. So I'll navigate back to our report. So we are not breaking our gross profit down at this level. We can't do that. We don't have a way of doing that. But now if you look at the business line, we want to see the gross profit by the different business line we have. So I'll navigate back to our report. So rather than have revenue on expense group on the legend, I will uncheck that. I'll scroll down, expand the table, and replace the legend with business line. So now we now have the breakdown of the revenue by the business, gross profit by the business line actually. The gross profit by the business line. So I'll do same for the matrix table. I'll just make a copy of it, Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll bring that here. I'll bring that here. Great. So what I'm simply going to do next is uncheck the total expense and replace that with gross profit, right? I'll also then uncheck the revenue or expense group and replace that with business line. So business line. Great. So I'll just come here and shift this to the end so it will look similar. So this is exactly what we want. But if you look at nutrition and food supplements, you can actually see that it's broken. Nutrition and food supplements, we actually can't see the food supplement clearly. So what we're simply going to do is come to transform data, while we are on Power Query, we'll simply just edit the nutrition and food supplement. We just edit this and abbreviate it. So I'll just simply right click on this and say replace value. What I'll just say is N and F. It should be N and F. I'll just say supplement. I hope this is short enough. Yeah, N and F sub. So we just know that this is N and F supplement. So I'll replace that. I'll replace that with N and F sub. So once I'm done, I'll come to close, apply, close and apply. So we can see that this nutrition and food supplement we have here is going to change to N and F sub rather than have the very long name we have that is actually breaking when we're trying to visualize that with the legend. Okay. Great, so the change has been applied and we are good. It looks better now. We can see nutrition and food supplements, sports equipment, and sportswear. We also have that on our table. The final thing we need to do, not the final now. Okay, so one thing we need to also do for the gross profit chart is to change the colors. So I'll just navigate back to the report I have here. Let's see if I can grab the colors we have here already. So I'll select this. I'll come to format. I'll navigate to bars. Then I'll start with nutrition and supplements. I'll just copy the color code. This is the color code 865F70. I'll copy this color code. This is for nutrition and supplements. I'll select my chart I have here. Nope. I'll come to format, bars. I'll change this to when we have nutrition and supplements. More colors, more. I'll paste the color code. That's green. Okay. Next, I'll navigate back to the reports. Let's grab the color code for, what's the other thing we have there? Sports equipment. More color. Sports equipment. This is the color code 70BBFF. I'll copy the color code, navigate back to the report. Sports equipment. So we're going to change a series to sports equipment and more colors. I'll paste this. That's good. Next, let's grab the last color code there. So for sportswear, let's grab the color code. That's 69DODE. I'll grab the color code for sportswear. Navigate back to the report. Change the series to sportswear. More colors. And paste the color code. So once that is done, I would simply just come out of here. So with this, we're actually done with the KPI card for gross profit. So I would simply just copy the text box we have here. Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll bring that here. And this should now be our gross profit. So I'll adjust. So this should be gross profit. Great. So we have revenue now, expense, gross profit. Next, I think the next one should now be our net profit. Our net profit. So for our net profit, let's quickly check. So the next will be our net profit. Net profit is going to be the next one, net profit. So for our net profit, let's quickly come to our card and check. Now let's check our documents. So for the document, the net profit is actually total revenue. We subtract the total expense from the total revenue. And to get the net profit margin is actually net profit divided by the total revenue. So net profit is simple, the total revenue minus the total expense, then net profit margin. So let's navigate back to our report. So we're going to start by creating, we already have the expense, total expense, we already have the revenue. So let's just say net profit now. New measure. So this would be net profits. Net profit, which is equal to the total revenue. We have the measure already, minus the total expense. So this gives us our net profit. So just like we have for gross profit, we also want to know the net profit margin. Net profit margin. So for that, we already have the formula, which is the net profit divided by the total revenue. That will give us the net profit margin times 100%. So let's come here. So the net profit margin now. So this is net profit margin, which is equal to, now we'll just call on our divide function. We want to divide now the net profit by the total revenue. So this will automatically give us the net profit margin. So we have the net profit margin. But just like we have for our previous card, that's revenue, expense, and gross profit, we also want to see the month-on-month change for the net profit. Month-on-month change for the net profit. Now we have the net profit, which means next we then need to go calculate the previous month net profit. Previous month net profit. To do that, I'll just come to the previous month gross profit. I'll just copy this formula. I'll stay on the DAX measure once more and say new measure. I'll paste the code I copied. Then I'll change this. Instead of previous month GP, it should be previous month NP, and all I need to do is just change this gross profit here to net profit. That's all. So we have the previous month net profit calculated. So next is our month-on-month net profit, which is simple. We've done that over and over again. So we just stay on our DAX measure and say new measure, net profit minus previous month net profit. Will give us our month-on-month net profit. That's M on M NP now is equal to net profit, right, minus previous month NP net profit. So we will now have our month-on-month NP. So now that we have our month-on-month NP, which means we can calculate our month-on-month net profit percent. So to do that finally is to stay on the DAX measure once more. Remember, we want all our measures to be here and say month-on-month NP percent, month-on-month NP percent is equal to, we call on our divide function. What are we dividing now? You can guess. We're dividing our month-on-month NP by our previous month NP. So we have our month-on-month NP percent. So with this, we are done with all the measures we need to create our net profit KPI card. So one more measure, we also need to then write our color, because we also want the color changes for net profit to be different also. So we're going to stay on the DAX measure once more and say NP value color. We're going to start with the value color. So NP value color. This would be simple. Call on our if function like we've always done. Now, if the month-on-month NP, that's the month-on-month NP, is greater than 0, remember it's 0, it should be green, else it should be red. So finally, we need one for the background color, that's the NP background color. I'm just going to copy the background color for one of the ones we have here, that's GP background color. I'm just going to copy this, make a copy of this. Now, DAX, new measure. I'll paste this, but this is no longer GP, is NP background color. Remember to come change the month-on-month GP to month-on-month NP. So with this, we're done with all the measures. So let's go ahead and create the KPI card. I'll make a copy of this to make it fast. Retain the formatting. I'll just say Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll bring that here. Okay, so I'll just replace gross profit with net profit. Net profit. Great. The next thing, I'm going to make a copy of this also. Not that, I'll make a copy of the gross profit margin. Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll bring that here. So I'll then change this from gross profit margin to net profit margin. So for the net profit margin, I'm going to select and come to general, that's format, change it from general to percent. So we have the net profit margin in percent. Great. Next, I'm going to make a copy of our month-on-month change card. Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll bring that here. So we're going to replace this with month-on-month NP percent. We also need to format this. I'll stay on this and come to general, change it to percentage. Now we then need to go change the color format. Although it's looking like what we want, but it's actually working with that of the gross profit. So what happened in a particular month when net profit is high or gross profit is high and the other one is low? I don't know, maybe for every time the both of them, maybe they behave the same way, I can't tell. But to be sure, we can then come to format now, say colored value. We want to change the conditional formatting for the colored value. This should be based on the NP value color. That's the NP value color. So I'll scroll down. This is the background color. So this is NP value color. I'll click OK. Next, let's go to the background color. I'll select general, effects, conditional formatting now. This should be based on the NP background color. That's NP background color, BG color. And I'll click on OK. Great. So we're done with this. Next, let's make a copy of this chart. I'll make a copy of this, Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll bring that here. So we are also working with the business line, but instead of having gross profit, we will need to change gross profit to net profit. Net profit. Great. So we're working with the business line also, but we're just changing the gross profit to net profit. That's the only thing we're doing. Nice. So next, we're going to make a copy of the table also. Ctrl C, Ctrl V. We'll bring that here. So the only thing we also need to change here is just change the gross profit and replace it with net profit. Yes, that's all. So with this, we're actually done with the KPI cards for revenue, expense, gross profit. So finally, let's just label this to be net profit. I'm going to select this, make one more copy. So this should be net profit. I'll just remove net profit. This should be net profit. So we're good. So now that we're done with the first set of card visuals, let's proceed to start creating the charts, some of the other visuals we need for the first page of the report. So I'll quickly navigate to the report we have here. So we need to start with the monthly breakdown of total revenue and expenses. Then we can go ahead to monthly comparison, total revenue versus target revenue, then monthly revenue by business line and all that. So let's start with the monthly breakdown of total revenue and expense. So to do that, we'll simply just use a stacked column chart. I'll bring that here. I'll just expand. So what we want to do is simple. We want to see our revenue and expense. So I'll check the total revenue and total expense. Great. We want to see this broken down by the month. Now we're going to use the short month. So I'm going to drop that on the, what is it called now? On the x-axis. But if you actually look at it, because we have our data filtered to match, so you can see that the slicer we have here is interacting with this visual, which we don't want. So I'll select the slicer, right? I'll select the slicer. I'll come to format. I'll say edit interaction. Now on the edit interaction, I'll say none. This is to filter, and this is none. I'll say none. So once I've done this, I'll simply just go back and click edit interaction again to remove every other thing. So we have our expense and revenue and expense broken down by month. So let's quickly make little adjustments. Let's just format this. This is total revenue, so I'll just make a change to the spelling here. Then this should be total expense. I'll just keep it a space here so that it's formatted. I'll select the visual, come to format visual. On the x-axis, we really don't need the title, so I'll put that off. On the y-axis, we still don't need the title, so I'll put that off. We only need the values, so I'll leave that there. Then for the grid lines, we don't need the grid lines. I'll put that off. I'll come to general effects. I'll turn off the background also. Don't need that. What else do we need? So for the bars, which is the columns now, we need to apply different color format to each of the columns. So for the total expense, let's just come to more colors and look for, this is red. Just look for a lighter version of red. So we can actually we can use this. Then for border, I'll just put on the border and see what happens. Okay, I'll expand the border and let's increase the width by 2. So this creates a little border between the revenue and the expense. So I'll navigate back to the report we have here. Let's just see if we can grab the color for the total revenue instead. So I'll just come to columns. I'll change this to revenue, more colors, more. I'll just grab the color code. The color code is actually 676EED. So I'll grab the color code, navigate back to the report. I'll select the visual, come to format, columns. We're looking at the revenue, more color. I'll paste the color code I copied. Okay. I'll also turn on the border. I'll expand and just increase the border by 1. That's 2 now. Okay, so you have just a little difference from what I have here and what is there, but it's actually cool. I think I like this too. So this is for the total revenue and total expense by short month. Not really by short month now, so we'll really need to give it a better title. So on the title here, I'll just come copy the title I have here, which is monthly breakdown of total revenue and expense. So I'll copy the title. I'll navigate back to our report now. I'll select the chart. I'll come to format, general, title. I'll remove what I have there and just paste what I copied. Also, what I'll do is come to centralize the title. So we now have the monthly breakdown of total revenue and expenses. So next, we want to see the monthly revenue trend against the target revenue. So for the data, they didn't actually give us a target revenue. They just said, okay, we should improvise, just improvise with any target revenue you can actually come up with. So not like there was a target revenue that was actually given. So for the target revenue, I think I came up with something. I just came up with a target for the revenue. Okay, so this was the target month revenue. It's just a value I came up with using the current revenue we actually had. So I'll just make a copy of this. So we need to create a measure now, right? We create a measure. I'll navigate back to the reports. So just create a measure, right? Come to the measure, new measure. So I'll just paste this. So this is just the target revenue I'm looking at. I think I'm looking at what do I have here? About 18 million, right? Yes, I'm looking at 18 million. Then what I'm finally doing is I'm trying to split that across different months. We have that's the 12 months. So to do the next thing we need to do now is simple. We just need to visualize this and what is it called now? Our revenue trend and the target revenue for each of the months. So we're using a line chart for that. So I'll simply just select a line chart, right? Then we also want to use our short month. Right? What we want to see is we want the total revenue. That's the total revenue on the y-axis. Then we want the new target month revenue we created on the secondary axis. So you can see we're not seeing any change right now. That's because our slicer is also interacting with this chart. So like we've done before, I'll select the slicer. I'll come to format. I'll say edit interaction. I'll say none. Wait, so I'll go back, click on edit interaction. So now we have the the target is actually same across all the months, but we're not comparing that against the revenue trend itself. So I'll just expand this and bring it down here. So quickly, we need to format this chart we have here. First, I'll come to format visual. For the x-axis, as before, I'll turn off the title. I don't need the title. For the y-axis, I'll also turn off the title. I don't need the title. Now for the secondary axis, I'll leave the values for now. We'll come back to that. The next thing we also need to do is to come down on the line. I'll scroll down and say I want the line not to be linear but smooth. Great. So this is applying to all. So I want to apply this to the target month now. This is to the target month. That's the target month revenue. I don't want a solid line, rather I want a dash, right? And what else? I don't want the width to be 3, I want it to be 2. Great. Finally, I want the color. I don't want it to be this. I actually want it to be, let's say, 30% white, that white 30% darker. So that will tell me that's the target. Now I'll go back, right, and change this to total revenue. Finally, I now want my line color to synchronize with what I have for the line, the chart up there as revenue. So I'll select this color. So this is my total revenue. So this is the trend. Then finally, I'll scroll up, right? I'll come to the secondary y-axis. I don't want these values here, so I'll just expand the values. I'll scroll down and change the colors to white. Great. So I now have the monthly revenue trend against the targets across the months from January to December. So we need to give this chart a proper title. I'll just select this visual now, or chart. I'll scroll down. This should be total revenue. So I'll just give a space, total revenue. Then we need to give this chart a perfect title. This visual a perfect title. That's monthly comparison, total revenue versus target revenue. So I'll click on my title once more. I'll just make a copy of this. Ctrl C. I'll navigate back to the report, select the visual, go to format, general, title. I'll remove what I have there and paste what I copied. I'll scroll down once more and centralize this. So that's taken care of. We have the first two visual in our overview page. Next, we then create a chart. That's a line visual now to compare the revenue across the three business line. The revenue across the three business line. So I'll just make a copy of this line chart we have here. Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll just bring that here. All right. Great. But now I don't want the target month. That's the target month revenue. I'll uncheck that. Also, I don't want to visualize this. Okay, yeah, I want to visualize this by the short month, right? But I also want to add a legend across the three business lines. So on the legend, I'll come down and bring the business line and drop it on the legend. Great. So you can actually see we're not getting any change that we desire. It's still the interaction issue. So I'll select this slicer we have here, this filter. I'll come to format, edit interaction, and I'll say for this visual, it should be none. Then I'll just come back and click on edit interaction again. The reason we're doing this is because we're already visualizing this visual. We're already doing this by month, so we can't actually filter by month anymore. Can actually filter, but our month filter is actually interacting with what we have up here, so it's actually cool. So the next thing I also want to do is just a very simple format, because the business line we have here, we already have a color code, so we want to ensure consistency. So I want to make sure the lines we have here, they are tailored to the color of the business line we have up here. So I'll come to format now, right? I'll scroll down, I'll come to lines, I'll scroll down, I'll change it to, that's a nutrition and food supplements. I'll just come straight to the color. I'll scroll down, more colors. I already know it's green, so I'll select this green. So for that, I'll scroll up once more again, change this to sports equipment. For sports equipment is blue. That's this blue color we have there. I'll scroll down to the color which is this blue. Then finally I'll go up, change this to sportswear. I'll scroll down, change the color to this red. One thing I'll also do is come up here, grid lines. I'll turn it off. We don't need the grid lines. So we have 3 charts. That's 3 visuals now. Let's quickly navigate back to our report here. I'll select what we have here. This is monthly revenue by business line. So I'll just copy the title. I'll navigate back to the report. For the title here, format, general, title, I'll just paste what I copied. Then scroll down and say I want it to be at the center. Okay, it's already at the center. So we have the monthly revenue by business line. I can select this chart, put down my control, select this very one. I'll come to format, general. I'll just come to effects and turn on the background. This is not really necessary though. So for the overview page, we're almost done. We need to create 2 more visuals. So let's quickly navigate back to the report. So for this visual, we're just looking at the total expense against the target expense. Then we're also looking at the total revenue against the target revenue. So like I said, not like the expense or revenue target were provided. I just came up with this target. So for the target revenue, this is the target revenue for each of the business line is actually this is 6 million. 6 million. Yes, 6 million naira or dollars. I think it's naira. I don't know, maybe dollars. So this is just a fictional target, so target revenue. Then for the target expense, expense target is actually, okay, 4 million. So I'll navigate back to our report now. So let's quickly create those 2 target values. I'll stay on the DAX and say new measure. I'll simply paste the target revenue, that's 6 million. I'll go ahead and create another target for the expense. I'll create a target for the expense now. So I'll just say expense target or target expense, new measure. So this should be target expense. So we have the target expense and the target revenue, fictional revenue across the 3 business lines. So that's fictional target expense and fictional target revenue. So we want to see this across the 3 business lines. We want to see the business line, the target revenue, the current revenue versus the target revenue. Then the business line, the current expense versus the target expense. So basically, this is what we have here: the business line and the target revenue against the target expense and all. So let's quickly create this now. So to create this, we're going to be using the line and clustered column chart. I think we can also achieve that with the line and stacked column chart also. Okay, so let's use the line and clustered column chart. So I'm just going to select the chart. What we want to see is we want to see the total revenue and the target revenue. Great. So we want to see this broken down by the business line, on the x-axis. Great. So now we want our total revenue to be on the column, but we want our target revenue to be on the line y-axis. So this is what we have. The total revenue will be on the column y-axis. The target revenue will be on the line y-axis. So we just need to do a simple formatting to the chart we have here. And to do that, first we'll come to format visual, right? For the x-axis, we'll put up the title like we've done. For the y-axis, we'll also put up the title. Then for the secondary axis, I'll put on the values, right? Then I'll expand, scroll down, and change the color to white. Wait. For the grid lines, I'll put it off. We don't need the grid lines. So next, I'll simply scroll down to where we have lines, right? This line is actually representing the targets. I'll scroll down. Where we have the width of the line to be 3, I would reduce this to be 0. Now we no longer have the line, but that's fine. I'll scroll to where we have markers. I will put on the markers. Now we have dots. I will expand this. I'll scroll down. Now the markers type, I'll change it from the dot to this dash we have here. So now we have dash, but it's small. Then I'll finally increase the size. You can actually see the size being increased to 20. Wait. So one thing we can then do is change the color of our bar. So this is talking about revenue. So we still can use this our column. We can use the color we used for revenue before now. So this is revenue. Great. So we can actually leave the targets to be the color we already have. So this is practically showing that for sports supplement, they exceeded the targets. Sportswear, they exceeded the target a little. Then for nutrition and food supplement, they didn't even get to the target revenue. So that takes care of revenue. So I'll just stay on this and come to total revenue here and give a space so it is clear. So next we'll be looking at the expense and the expense target. Sorry about this. So the expense and the expense target, that's expense, total expense against the target expense. So I'll just make a copy. Okay, to be clear, I'm not going to make a copy. I'll just reduce this. Now we're going to be using this chart, that's the line and clustered column chart, right? I'll select that again. While the chart is here, we're looking at the total expense. So the total expense, I will bring it to the column y-axis, right? Now the target expense, I didn't spell it this way. Now the target expense, I'm going to bring that to the line y-axis. I'm going to bring the target expense now to the line y-axis, right? So once I do that, you see a line chart. That's a dot now. It's coming as a dot. But then we then want to see this across the business line. So the business line will come to the x-axis. Now you can actually see the line and the expense across the different business line. So to make the format look exactly like what we have here, the next thing I'm going to do is come to format, right? For the x-axis, as we've done, I'll turn off the title. For the y-axis, I'll also turn on the title. For the secondary y-axis, I will turn on the values, expand, scroll down, and change the color to white. I'll collapse this. Now, I'll go to the line. For the lines, I'm going to come to the width of the line. I'll reduce it to 0. You're no longer seeing the line there. That's fine. Don't be scared. I'll come to the markers and I'll put on the markers. So you have dots here. Rather than dot as the markers, I will expand the markers and I'll say I want the marker type, the shape type now to be this dash we have here. Then finally, I want to increase the size of the dash to 20. Great. So now I can carefully scroll up, right, and change my column colors for that of expense, I can say now it should no longer be blue, rather it should be this color we already have for expense. So you can now see the expense against the target expense. So for sports equipment, they exceeded the expected expense, the target expense. For sportswear, they were exceeded a little. Then for nutrition and food supplement, they didn't even get to the target expense, what they expected them to spend. So with this, we can then come to here and just give a space to make sure it's in order. Then for the target expense, I'll also give a space here to make sure it's in order. So great. So now we have the target expense and the target revenue. We can now see that across the three business line. So one thing we can do is select this, come to format. We don't need the grid lines, so I'll put it off. So with this, we're done with the first overview page of the report. So we need to just give charts, visuals, proper title. This is expense versus target expense by business line. I'm just going to copy this, go back to the report. We're talking about expense. I'll paste the title, general title. I'll paste this title here. I'll scroll down, come to center and centralize the title. I'll go back for the expense. That's for the revenue now. I'll also copy the title. That's revenue versus target revenue by business line. So I'll navigate back to our report. Now we're talking about revenue, format, general, title. I'll paste this here. I'll scroll down also, come to center. So now you can actually see that we now have the overview page ready. We've created the overview page. We now have our monthly breakdown of total revenue by expense, monthly comparison, total revenue by target revenue, revenue by the trend by the business line. Then finally, we now have the revenue versus target by business line and expense versus target by business line. So with this, we're done with the overview page of the report. Now, if we navigate to the report we have here, you can actually see that this is the overview page. But when you come to the profit breakdown, everything down here changes. For the profit breakdown, everything down here changes. Charts, they change, which means we then need to now focus on creating the visuals for the profit breakdown. This is what we're focused on now. So I'll come back to the report. So one thing we need to do, we are creating that here also, but we can't create those visuals for the profit breakdown on top of what we already have here. So what I'm going to simply do, right, I'm going to stay on February, right? I always want a particular month to be selected, so I'll just stay on February. Now I'm going to select this chart, hold down my control, select the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. So I'm going to select these 5 charts. You can do the selection just the way I've done it now, or I'll simply uncheck, just highlight and select the 5 of them. So once I have this chart selected, the next thing I'll do is come to view, right? Selection. Now these charts are already selected, so they are highlighted here. So what I'm going to do, I'm simply going to right click, group, and I'll group. So I have these 5 charts grouped together as one. So let me take that again. I'll just Ctrl Z. So what I basically did was, remember, we just want to, we have about 4 navigations, but for every time we go for our profit breakdown, we're not going to the second page. We're still on this first page, but just the charts we have down here, they are changing. So how do we do that? We're going to be using the bookmark much more later. So we need to then group these 5 charts we have together and call it overview. So you can simply just highlight everything here, right? Once that is done, you see that we have the 5 charts highlighted. We can then come to view, click on selection. Because I have these 5 charts selected, they are also selected here on the selection pane. So I'll simply just stay on one and right click and say group, and I'll click on group. So I've grouped these charts together. So this group 1, I'll just rename it to overview, hit my enter button. Great. So I have this entire visual, the 5 visuals selected as grouped as one already. So I'll select. The next thing I'll do, I'll see this I will have here. I'll click on hide this visual. So it's going to hide the entire visual. The visuals are still there, they are not missing. I will unhide, it will unhide them. I'll click on hide, it will hide them. So I'll just click on the selection pane. So we still have our visuals there. So now we can go ahead and create the visuals for the profit breakdown. So for the profit breakdown, we are going to start by calculating the operating profit. The operating profit, that's the total revenue, cost of goods, and gross profit margin. So we're going to be using the line and clustered column chart. That's clustered column chart for the operating profit breakdown. I'm just going to select that and bring it here, right? I'll bring that here. So what we need is, we need the total revenue. So I'm going to click on the total revenue. I'll bring that to the column axis, right? I'll scroll up and look for the cost of goods. That's the COGS. I'll also drop that on the column y-axis. Then I'm going to look for the gross profit margin. Gross profit margin. This is the gross profit margin. I'll drop that on the line y-axis. Line y-axis. Great. Now you can actually see the chart is not properly formatted. So edit interaction like we've done before. This slicer we have here. I'll select the slicer, come to format, edit interaction. I don't want any interaction with this chart. I will uncheck. I'll come back and say edit interaction again. But we want to see all this by month. By month. So I'll come to the dates table. So if we use by month, we're only going to see it by, let's say if we say by month now, we're only going to see it this way. But we want to see it by month and quarter at the same time. So I will uncheck this. I'll replace it with dates. This date we have here, I'll just bring the date field and drop it here. Great. So this is what we actually want to see. We want to see it by month and by quarter. But we don't need the year, so I will uncheck the year from here. So I'll leave the day just to tell us that we have 31 days in this month. We have 28 days in this month. We have 31 days in this month and all that. So now this is the chart we want, but we also need to do some kind of formatting to this chart. So to do that, for this visual now or chart, I'll come to format visual, right? On the x-axis, like we've always done, I'll put off the title. We don't need the title. I will scroll down to the y-axis. I'll also put off the title. We don't need the title, right? Now, on the secondary y-axis, I will put on the values. I will expand. I'll scroll down and change the color to white. Great. I'll also scroll down. For the grid lines, we really don't need them. I'll put them off. So the grid lines will be off. Okay. So next, I'm going to scroll down. Let's now come to where we have the columns. For the columns, we have total revenue. We already have a color for total revenue. So we stick to that color. This is the total revenue color, right? I'll select that. Now, for the cost of goods, we have a color for the cost of goods up there. So I'll come change this to cost of goods. I think this is the color for the cost of goods. Great. So we are in flow with the colors we're already using in our reports. Now for the gross margin is actually the line chart. So we're done with the columns, right? Which means we need to come to the lines. I will scroll down. Now, we don't want a solid line. I want a dash line to start, right? And I also want the line not to be linear. It should be smooth. That's 2. I also want to scroll down and I want to change the color of the line to black. That's 3. Great. So one thing I also want to do, we now want to add data label to just the line. So I will scroll down. On the data label, I will put it on. Don't worry. It's not looking nice. That's fine. I will expand the data label, right? I'll change the series to total revenue. I will put off the label. I'll change the series to cost of goods. I'll put off the label. So we only have the label for the gross profit margin. Every other one would be using the label we have on the y-axis. I'll just expand this a bit. Great. So with this, we're actually done with the visual for the operating profit. So we'll give this a very good title. Navigate back to the report we have here. So this is operating profit monthly and quarterly breakdown. So I'll just copy the title. I'll come to format, general, title, operating profit breakdown. I'll make a copy of this. Navigate back to the report, select format, general, title. I'll paste what I copied. Then centralize this. So we now have the operating profit monthly and quarterly breakdown. Next, we want to look at the net profit and net profit margin, the trend, monthly and quarterly also. We're also going to be using the same chart, that's the clustered line and clustered column chart. I'm just going to bring that down here. So what do we want to look at? We want to look at the net profit. So I'll take the net profit. Net profit. And the net profit should be on the column y-axis now. Then we need the net profit margin to be on the line y-axis. Next, we then need to bring our date to the x-axis. I'll bring the date to the x-axis. I will check the year. Now we still don't have any change yet, so I'm going to come to format. Before I come to format, I'll select the slicer that is currently interacting with the chart. I'll select the slicer, come to format, say edit interaction, and I'll say none. I'll go back to edit interaction and I'll check. So we're good. Next, we need to just quickly format this chart, this visual. So I'll come to format visual, right? X-axis as we've done. I'll put off the title. We don't need it. Y-axis, I'll also put off the title, right? On the secondary y-axis, I'll turn on the value, expand the values, scroll down, change the color to white. I'll scroll up. The next thing also we need to do is now come to the columns. The columns we can actually give, let's just go copy the color code we have for the columns here. So I'll just come here and look for the color code. I'll look for the color code, expand columns. I'll grab the color code. The color code is actually 6482AD. 6482AD. I'll copy that. I'll navigate back to the report. I'll paste the color code. Great. So we're done with the columns. The next we need to go to is the line actually. So I'll come to lines, expand the lines. I'll scroll down. Now I don't want it to be a solid line. I want it to be a dash line, right? Next, I also want it to be a smooth line, right? Then also I want the color to be black. So I can actually change the color to be black, or I leave it at the color we already have there. I think it's cool. But let's change it to be black and see. Okay, it's okay. So the next thing we need to do is put on the data label, right? Put on the data label. So I'll scroll down, I'll put on the data label, right? It's not looking good. I'll expand the data labels. Now for the first series, net profit, we don't need the label actually. The label is working with that of the y-axis already. So we only need it for this. So for the net profit margin, we're good to go. We're fine. We want the labels for that. We can scroll down to the values. We actually have background and transparency. So let's see what happens if we change. Okay, so just change the background transparency so we can actually highlight it a little. So we can reduce the transparency to like 20. Okay, do we need to reduce it further? So let's just make it 10. Or do we need to increase it actually? So probably we increase the transparency. Oh, yeah. So let's say 70. So we're good. With this, we only need to do one more thing. The grid lines, we don't need them. So for the grid lines, we just put it off. Now we can give this chart a very good title then. I'll navigate to the report and say what's the title for this quarterly and monthly net profit with profit margin. Okay, so general title, I'll just copy this. General title, I'll paste what I copied. I'll scroll down and centralize this. So we are good. We only have 2 more visuals left. So let's navigate back to the report. So for this, we need to recreate our card visual, but we already have cost of goods, right? We have cost of goods measure already. We just need to break it down. Then we now have to look at the EBIT. The EBIT. So we can come to our document here. The EBIT is simply first we need to calculate the EBIT, which is the earning before interest and tax, which is the formula is gross profit minus total OPEX. Gross profit minus total OPEX. Now we have gross profit already, right? Then the OPEX, I think we have the OPEX on the expense slash revenue subgroup. So we can calculate the OPEX. So we can then get our EBIT, then go ahead to get our EBIT margin. So let's start by calculating our OPEX. Let's start by calculating our OPEX. So if you come to table view, right? The table view, I'll simply select the revenue expense. We have the OPEX here. So we can calculate the OPEX by simply saying we want to sum our amount, but we want to filter it to when the revenue or expense group is OPEX. So let's quickly create that measure. I would scroll up and just stay on that measure and say new measure. So this measure is going to be OPEX, and we're simply saying calculate, right? We want to calculate. What do we want to calculate? We want to sum our amount, that's revenue amount now, but we want to filter it to when the revenue or expense group is equal to OPEX. Spelling must be right. Great. So to then calculate the EBIT, like we said, the EBIT is simply the earning before interest and tax, so which is the gross profit minus total OPEX. So we already have the total OPEX, so we need to just subtract gross profit minus total OPEX to give us the EBIT. So now we can come on the DAX measure and say new measure. So EBIT now will simply be our gross profit, right? We have gross profit already minus OPEX. We have OPEX already. So we are good. Now we have the EBIT. So finally, we just need to calculate the EBIT margin. EBIT margin. And for the EBIT margin is simply the EBIT divided by the total revenue times 100. Times 100 is already, we're using the divide function, so that has been done already. So that's the EBIT divided by the total revenue. So I'm going to stay on that measure and say EBIT margin now. So this should be EBIT margin. EBIT margin, right? EBIT margin is equal to, we now call on our divide function here. We want to divide our EBIT by total revenue. Yeah. So we now have the EBIT margin. So we can go ahead now and create the few charts we have left. And so we are going to be replicating these card visuals we have here, right? We're going to be replicating these card visuals we have here. We're going to replicate these card visuals we have here. They're already up here, so we just need to replicate them for cost of goods and for EBIT. Then we'll break them down by the different business line. So this should be easy. Then we go ahead and visualize the EBIT and EBIT margin. So to do this, we just make a copy of this, right? Make a copy of this. I'll just bring this down here, right? And I'll change this from gross profit to cost of goods. Cost of goods. This is cost of goods now. Next, I will make a copy of this chart, this visual we have here. I'll make a copy of this visual. That's just Ctrl C and Ctrl V. I'll bring this down here, but then I'll uncheck gross profit and replace it with cost of goods. It will retain the same format, so it's good. It's great. We don't need to do much. Finally, I'll bring the table once more. Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll just bring this down here. And I'm only going to then replace I'll then replace the gross profit now, right, by cost of goods. So we're great. I can just come to more options, sort it by cost of goods. So we have this for the cost of goods. We're going to put a title later to make it clearer. I'll just reduce this a bit. I'll select this and push it to the end also. Great. So we can replicate this for the EBIT also. I'll just make Ctrl C, Ctrl V. I'll bring this up here. So this will no longer be cost of goods, rather it should be EBIT. Next, we also need to make a copy of the chart. Ctrl C, Ctrl V. So this is no longer going to be cost of goods. It's simply going to be EBIT. So I'll uncheck cost of goods and replace it with EBIT. It retains the same formatting also. So next, we finally have to do for the table, Ctrl C, Ctrl V. We'll bring this down here, right? We'll uncheck the cost of goods and replace it with EBIT. Great, so I can just sort this once more. Sort by the EBIT. Great, so we have it already. So one thing we need to do is just add the title to be clear. Ctrl C, Ctrl V. So this should be cost of goods, right? So this should be cost of goods. I'll delete the G. I'll just place this here. I'll make a copy. So this should be the EBIT. Great. So next, we need to then create a chart for the EBIT and EBIT margin. So I can just make a copy of this chart I already have here, but I think we want to achieve the same thing. So I'll put this here. The only thing I'm going to uncheck the net profit and replace it with EBIT, right? I'll scroll down, replace the net profit margin with EBIT margin. So I'll select the EBIT margin, right? I'll format that to from general to be percentage. Then we know our slicer is currently filtering this visual. So I'm going to select the slicer, right? I'll select the slicer like we've done. I'll come to format, edit interaction, and I'll say none. Then finally, I'll go back to edit interaction again. So now we have the EBIT and the EBIT margin. So we need to just do a quick formatting to this. We select this, right? Come to format. We'll scroll down to where we have the data labels, right? And we'll simply say change the series to EBIT, but we don't want any label, so we'll put it off. So this looks clean. Great. So we just need to give this chart a very this is quarterly and monthly net profit and net profit margin, which is wrong. So it's supposed to be EBIT and EBIT margin. So I'll select that, come to format, general, title, monthly, quarterly. This is not net profits, rather it is EBIT with EBIT margin. Great. So I believe with this, we are actually done with the profit breakdown. With this, we're actually done with the profit breakdown. With this, we are done with the profit breakdown. So with this, we're actually done with the profit breakdown. So now to proceed, we also need to create our expense breakdown on this same view. Every other thing up here remains the same. We can filter that, but we want this entire view down here to just change and replace everything about expense should come here. So just like we did for the overview, we're going to do the same thing, because if we navigate back to the report we have here, so we have the overview. If I come to the expense breakdown, basically everything down here is changing. Everything down here is changing for the expense breakdown. Not until we come to quarterly and expense income, that's when we go to the next page. But we have every other thing from overview to profit breakdown on one page, only changing the view down here. So profit breakdown. Great. So we now have the expense breakdown. So we're done with the profits and overview. So let's navigate back to our reports. So just like we did for the overview, I'm going to select everything about this profit breakdown, right? I'll select everything. Make sure everything is selected, right? Then I'll go to view once more. I'll click on selections. Everything I have selected is already selected on the selection pane. So I'll just right click on one of them and say group. I'll say group. Then I can now call this, instead of group 1, I can say profit breakdown. Great, I can say profit breakdown. So if I hide, you won't see anything about the profit breakdown. I can come and unhide, you're going to see overview, right? I can hide it. Then I can come unhide, you see profit breakdown. So this is the principle we're going to be using much more later to create our bookmark and the navigation. So I'll just hide this once more. I'll click on the selection. Then we can go ahead and create our expense breakdown. But that's going to be for the part 2 of this video. So With this, we're done with part 1 of the video. For part 2 of the video, we're going to be looking at the expense breakdown and the quarterly income statement and expense statement. So why don't you hit the subscribe button, turn on your notification so you get the notification when part 2 of the video is uploaded. Till then, stay safe.